Hi, everybody. Welcome to Pediatric Grand Rounds, the first iteration of the season. We're really excited to see you all here. I know we have people on Zoom as well, and it's really nice to be back together. Hopefully this newest mini surge will not get us all on Zoom again, but continue us to have in person, maybe with a few extra masks or something like that. We have a really exciting series of talks lined up for the fall. You can check it out on our wiki site. Particularly want to call out next week the Grumbach Award Lecture, which normally actually is done in the early summer. This year we're doing it a little later with one of our neonatology fellows, Kayla Clavonen, presenting her work. So I hope you will all be here to celebrate with her, to listen to her talk. By the way, I need to say Dr. Hirsch is with us, but over Zoom today. That's why I'm doing introductions. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to briefly do a UCSF land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Ramaytush Ohlone elders, past, present, and future, who call this place the land that UCSF sits on their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. And we thank the Ramaytush Ohlone community for their stewardship and support. And we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. And then it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Professor Yang-Shin Kim, who is a professor of psychiatry and epidemiology and biostatistics, and a director of the UCSF Center for ASD and NDDs. She's a native of Korea, completed child and adolescent psychiatry training and her MPH at Yale and her PhD at UC Berkeley School of Public Health. If you need more degrees, I don't know how many you can collect. An active clinician, educator, and investigator, Dr. Kim studies epidemiology, differential susceptibility, and etiology of developmental psychopathology using large-scale epidemiology studies in Korea, the United States, and other countries. She also examines diverse high-risk youth in the Navajo Nation. She received the Presidential Early Career Award in Science from President Obama for her contribution to the scientific community with her research and community outreach efforts. And we're incredibly grateful that she accepted an invitation to educate all of us more about what's going on with autism spectrum disorders. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me to the Pediatric Grand Round series, especially the first one. I hope I opened the door nicely. And there are a couple of things that I need to disclose. I might cough in the middle of it, but I'm COVID negative. I've been coughing for about a month, and the great UCSF doctors couldn't fix me yet, but I'm waiting for it. So it's just one thing that don't get too scared, but I'm not going to die or I'm not going to spread any disease. It's going to happen. The second thing is, thank you for the generous introduction, but the collection of the degree that I believe the smart people don't have to go to school to learn things, only not so smart people to go to school, pay a lot of money and get the degree. So that's why I ended up doing it. Okay, now, is ASD increasing? Have you heard about it? Yes. Do we know what it means, by the way, when autism is increasing? I get very confused. What do you mean by that autism is increasing? Is that like we are all of a sudden having people fall into autism, that having new cases? Are we finding the people who are always there that we didn't recognize? Or are we having called those people with different names in the past? Now we are calling them with autism, and that's why we are having increase of autism. The reason that it's so confusing is because there are a couple of ways to count the number of diseases in the medicine. So here I'm always feeling so pathetic. I hope in the future that I can disclose something, but at this point, I don't have anything to disclose. But by the end of this grand round, I'm hoping that we are going to learn about the several ways to define disease frequencies and how they differ from each other. And then using that, and we begin to identify what are the factors that are actually affecting on these disease frequency measures. And then the third objective is that we get to see the people with conditions who come to our clinic. But there are other peoples in the community who couldn't come to us for whatever reasons. And to understand the broad and comprehensive disease phenotype, we really have to include everybody and understand the natural course of the disease and what kind of treatments are going to be effective for different group of people. So appreciate the importance of the representative sample in understanding those things. So I hope we can achieve that at the end of our talk, the grand round. So the first thing first, let's see how to measure the frequency. There are a couple of ways to measure disease frequency. One is incidence, the other one, prevalence. So this is, even for the epidemiologists, pretty confusing, and they use it interchangeably, but is that really so? And when we are saying that autism is increasing, people get really worried because they're thinking that probably incidence, the new cases of autism is increasing. But is that really interchangeable? What are we talking about? So the incidence, let's see, what is incidence? Incidence is among the people at the beginning of the study who were healthy, meaning didn't have that disease condition. In our case, didn't have autism. And among those people, we follow these people for a certain period and then see how many people are falling ill, new people. So that's the incidence. And we have to, usually the instance is always a prospective follow-up study of the people without that condition and looking at counting how many people are falling ill. So now let's look at some kind of schematic example. Let's say that we are observing 10 units of time, whatever that unit is, of 6 people. Number one person came in at the beginning of the study and finished the study, and he didn't, or the number one person didn't develop that condition. The condition is presented as X. Number two person came in at the beginning, and the time point of 7 developed the disease. So at this point, this person's participation in the instance study ends because developed the study and they are not at risk anymore. Number 3 person entered the study and at the time point 2 developed this disease. Number 4 person, on the other hand, entered the study at the time point 4 and finished the study, didn't develop the disease. Number 5 person entered the study at 2 time point, and then at the 5 time point, developed the condition. Number 6 person entered study at the beginning, but dropped out from the study at the 8th time point and didn't develop the study, didn't develop the disease. So how do we compute the instance in this case? We are going to add up all the people who participated and contributed to the study, which is for number 1, individual 10, number 2, 7, number 3, 2, number 4, 6, number 5, 3, number 6, 7. We all add 8, we all add them up in the denominator, and the numerator is 1, 2, 3, 3 new people. Therefore, it's going to be 3 over 38, and it has the unit, which is the time. So instance is a rate. Okay, it's a dynamic thing. Problem for this instance is that for the conditions like childhood onset neuropsychiatric disorders, it's really hard to see when the diseases begin to have onset. So in that case, we use cumulative instance. What is cumulative instance? Cumulative instance is that accumulation is the time period. So we're looking the period, we are looking at the people who are disease-free at the beginning of the study for a certain period of time, cumulatively, let's say 5 years, 7 years. And during that time, that we are seeing how many people develop the condition. So in this case, we are looking at the cumulative instances saying average risk of developing condition over a certain period of time. So in this case, we will have some example. Let's say we are following up 100 siblings of autism prevalence, and then over 3-year period, 9 children developed autism. In this case, we are saying that 0.09 or 9% of cumulative instance for 3 years. But we further observed these cohort for 2 more years, and then we found 6 more kids have diagnosis of autism by the end of 5 years. Now the cumulative instance becomes 0.15 or 15% over 5 years. So this is the instance, which is quite a dynamic estimate tied with the time. Now, on the other hand, prevalence is the number of subjects with the disease, number of people, among the people they are included in at a certain point of time. So this is another way to call the disease pool. Okay. So the relationship between these disease pool prevalence is that the incidence is the influx, the new cases of disease, the influx to the disease pool, and the fatality and recovery is the outflow of the disease pool. So for example, if people get the disease and die really fast or cured really fast, even though they have a lot of instances, the disease pool will go down, so will the prevalence. Now, let's look at this relationship in a real life. So what I'm trying to say is that the incidence and prevalence is not one-to-one relationship. Because incidence goes up, that doesn't mean prevalence goes up, or prevalence goes up, that doesn't mean incidence goes up. Okay, so let's look at the real life example. In 1980s, the AIDS instance has been significantly decreased because of the successful prevention treatment with the antiretroviral treatment, as well as public health strategy to reduce the risky sex behaviors. So now incidence is decreasing. Many people are thinking the prevalence is decreasing, right? On the other hand, the prevalence is increasing because, again, the effective antiretroviral treatment has been very successful in prolonged life of the people with HIV and AIDS. So the prevalence has been greatly increased despite of the decrease of the incidence. Now let's look at this relationship a little more kind of in this animation schematic way. So let's assume that you have a house guest arriving 2 people a day, and they're going to stay for 5 days. The question is, how many people are you going to have at the end of the week? The first day that 2 people arrived and no one leaves. The second day, the 2 people arrived and no one leaves. So at the end of the second day, you have 4 people. And third day, two more people arrive, no one leaving. And fourth day, 2 more people arrived, no one leaving. And fifth day, 2 people arrived and no one leaving. So far, you have the 10 people in your house. The sixth day, you are going to have 2 more people, correct, arriving. But the difference is the 2 people arrived on the first day are going to leave. Now you're having 10 people again. On the seventh day, 2 more people arrives, and the 2 people arrived on the second day are going to leave. And at the end of the 7th day, you still have 10 people. So that was the original question, okay? So here, the arrival of 2 people per day, that's incidence. And we have reached a steady status of 10 people at the end of the 5 days. That was prevalence. So what connects the prevalence with the incidence is this duration, disease duration, 5 days. Okay, so it's not, again, I'm trying to make a point that prevalence and incidence is not one-to-one ratio, but it has a complicated relationship. Now, I'm going to talk about other factors, actually, not the relationship between incidence and prevalence, but other factors that's affecting on the disease estimate, incidence or prevalence, okay? Now, you have all these guests in your house, and then you heard that some people have some headache, which is presented with red head. And you learned about prevalence and incidence. Okay, I'm going to compute the prevalence. How many people? Like 2 out of 13. So okay, the headache prevalence is like 13%. Now, a week later, your neurology friends coming in and saying, hey, actually, you need to include this hot pink and baby pink headed people too, because it's a milder form of headache, or it's just different types of headache. Okay, he's an expert. So I give in, and then the prevalence rose to like 20%. And then a week later, your friend comes in again and then asking you, did you check your basement? And I said, no, they are not going to go to the basement. It's just very muggy, no window, and there's only just gym equipment. And your friend is saying there's a new study coming out saying that these people will do anything, including exercising, to get rid of the headache. So you've been nagging, and then, okay, I'm going to go down and then check what's happening in the basement. And then, as your friend predicted, you found more people, like 2, 3 more people in the basement with headache. So now your prevalence rose to like 30%. Okay, now you're thinking, and then, okay, if these people go down to the basement, maybe they go to the rooftop and attic because there are more air and more sunlight, they might go up there. Okay, so you go up and find way more people like here in the headache. I'm sorry. On the rooftop and attic have a lot of people with headache. Now your prevalence went up to 60%. Okay, the guest in your house heard it by grapevine and thinking there's something going on in your house And there's a headache epidemic because it just raised from 13 to 60% over just 3 weeks, and they're panicking. What they didn't know is that you had expanded the definition of headache from redhead to the reddish head, pink and hot pink. And also you expanded study population from first and second floor to include the basement and attic. And you doing by yourself, not by the neurology friends, asking on the attic and the rooftop. That's your awareness about this and the better case identification method. So this is the schematic kind of illustration. Now let's see how it really happens in the real autism world. So before I go on, the DSM-5 introduced in 2014, 2015, and the DSM-5 now categorize autism under one diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, and characterized by 2 pervasive and significant impairment in social communication and the presence of restricted and repetitive behaviors, interests, and activities. While the severity varies, even the least serious cases need significant support to navigate regular education and social and vocational settings. So the ASD began to garner a lot of attention because of the rapid rise of the prevalence from 0.01% in 1960s to 2010-11 to 2.6%. And in the worldwide data. And this was also evident in the US data presented by CDC over this low in the 1970s to very high prevalence of autism in the 2020s. So because of this rapid rise of the ASD prevalence, people begin to be very concerned and anxious and claim that there are some environmental factors, including the air pollutions, pesticide, even pet shampoo, and all this too well vaccination is causing autism. And there are some treatment that's like chelation proven to be very dangerous, still popular. But we are armed with the knowledge of the prevalence and instance now. So we are in a position now, look at this previous ASD studies, prevalence studies with more critical keen eyes. And let's review some of those. So how does the diagnostic criteria change the prevalence of autism? This is the one study done by the Northern Finland colleagues looking at the number of kids with autism in 40,000 adolescents. When they used Kanner diagnostic scale, which is the most stringent diagnostic criteria, their prevalence was 0.02%. But in the same population, when they used a little broader autism diagnostic criteria by DSM-4 and ICD-10, prevalence rose to 0.06%. And when they used even broader diagnostic criteria, autism spectrum disorder of ICD-10, the prevalence rose 0.08%. Just with the different diagnostic criteria, prevalence rose like 4 times. Now, this is the trend of the autism, number of kids with autism enrolled in the educational system in Minnesota. until 1990s, there are the very similar number of kids in the system, about 400. But after that, it begins to grow really exponentially to the point that in 2000, the number of kids enrolled with autism diagnosis raised to 4,000. So what's happening here? In the same time, the number of kids enrolled in the school system rose by only 6%. It doesn't match. So they were worried, but when you look at this data a little more carefully, the more broader diagnostic the criteria has been introduced, but most importantly, the Individual with Disability Education Act was implemented. So in the past, kids with autism stayed at home and didn't come to school. Now they are, it's mandatory for them to come to the school, and they are all counted in. And that's what makes a huge difference in this data. Now, I'm going to talk about another factor, which is the access to the services and how it impacts on the prevalence instance. So all these dots, black or white, they represent the number of children with autism in the community. When you're using service data and with the low access to the service, this service data only captured this little amount of the kids with autism, whereas the same number of kids, but have a more higher access to the service captures this more kids with autism, when actually the number of the autism kids was same in the community with the same prevalence. So this is a problem when you're using just service or administrative data, because it depends on the access to the service and the resources in the community. When the same prevalence, maybe the different access ended up different prevalence, or over the same course, in the same population, over the course, the access to the service got better, then it looks like prevalence of autism has been increasing. Now, the last way that we are gonna all putting this together and then look at the changes of the prevalence or the differences. So in this case, it's a UK population, and it's just over the 10 years that this prevalence rose from 0.1 to 1.6%, just 10 years, 16 times. It's like there is an epidemic, right? Let's see what's happening. When you look at the first time, the bottom, in the past, because the lack of resources for the research, a lot of researchers have used administrative data, which is educational data or the hospital data, to identify cases with autism. And when you look at the service data to compute the prevalence, no matter how many data you look at, it's going to be obviously underestimate, because for whatever reason, resources, accessibility, public awareness, you're going to only capture the people who came to the hospital. On the other hand, these two groups actually did screening and assess the children and reported, in rather younger age children, reported the prevalence, and it was much higher, 0.5 to 0.6%, because they actually not counting on the administrative data, that they actually screened all the children. However, when you compare this group who are doing the younger age group compared to the older age group, their prevalence is a little lower. It's because the symptoms of autism, especially the children's behavior changes over course. So the diagnosis of autism in younger age group is a little less stable than the older age group, and a little harder to make a diagnosis. So the prevalence in the older age group is a little higher. Now, even among the people who saw the older age group, when you look at the only special education children, because Baird group thought that the autism children are all severely impaired, so obviously they're going to get the services. And they reported 1.2%. But then Baron Cohen group is having a little more ambition that, okay, we're going to look at special and mainstream school children. And they found more, a higher 1.6% of the prevalence, which makes sense because you're looking out even more children. Unfortunately, this group response rate from the regular education group was only 27%, which was unfortunate. So with this, now we kind of have a pretty good idea what we need to do to have valid prevalence and estimate measures of the disease. First, we got to have a sufficiently large population that includes all the individuals at risk for outcome, not just first, second floors, but everywhere. And then we got to have systematic, standardized screening of the population. We're not going to do haphazard way. And also we're going to do the diagnosis in that way too. And we have to have an age for reliable and valid and case ascertainment. We're not going to look at the newborn to make a diagnosis of autism. We got to wait some. And then especially for instance studies, we have to have consistent case identification method over the courses. So with that, our team had a great ambition that we're going to achieve this in the Korean population using total population approach. Why Koreans? Yes, I'm a native Korean, so I would love to go to Korea to meet my friends and families and have a lot of Korean food. But actually, that was the minor reason. The main reason is because they have mandatory compulsory school system that every kid has to go to school. And it's a public school mostly. The private school and the homeschool is so low, it's almost non-existing. And so that means that when I go to the educational system, I'm going to find all the kids that I need to find. And then the other thing is that Koreans are almost 100% literate, which makes everything, screening with paper and pencil or computer, much easier, not like different languages. Can you read this? So with all those reasons, I found Korea is a really, really good place to do the study. And we decided to use multiple informants, meaning parents and the teachers together to let us know if they are worried about the kid. And then we are going to use the gold standard ADAS and ADI and other cognitive testing to make together the diagnostic assessment and then make a best estimate clinical diagnosis. So these are this is one of the 33 high school, the elementary schools that participating in our study. And we visited teachers and gave a lecture about the autism in the in-house school seminars. And then at the end of those talk, that the teachers fill out the autism screening questionnaire if they are concerned about their kids. The screener was for the regular education, we used the autism screening spectrum screening questionnaire composed of 27 items and asking the core symptoms of autism. why we use that. It's a really well-established screener, but also it's free for use. So when you do the mass screening, that it becomes a pretty important factor too for the feasibility. And when they score high, and both either parents or teacher, they are invited, they are screen positive. And plus, anybody with autism or ID category at the disability registry, or anybody who's attending the special education schools, they are considered the screen positive. And anybody who wants to be evaluated for concerns they have. So this is the autism screening questionnaire, 27 items. And we were glad that we used both parents and teacher screening questionnaire because they are correlated significantly, but the correlation was pretty modest, saying that demonstrating that the parents and teachers capture different aspects of autism symptoms. Now, when they are screen positive and then they've gone through the ADAS, ADI, cognitive testing, and any other general psychopathology questionnaires, and then the two diagnosticians reviewed all these materials independently and reached a consensus best estimate diagnosis based on DSM-4 at the time and later on DSM-5. So we published this paper in 2011 in American Journal of Psychiatry, and we were reporting 2.6%. It was really scary because at that time, the prevalence was 1%. We did everything, but it came back with 2.6% no matter what we did. So we look at the data more carefully. What we found is the clinical population, meaning the kids were diagnosed with autism in our study who already sought for some kind of educational or clinical care that we called clinical population. In that population, prevalence of autism was 0.8%, which was exactly same with the prevalence reported in US and European countries at the time. What drove our prevalence up was this 1.89% in the non-clinical population who are untreated and unidentified in the community. Because our study allowed to identify these clinical and non-clinical population, look at the phenotype. So we did go ahead and then look at the differences of the phenotype. In the clinical ASD population, which is the kids that we see at our clinic, the majority of them had autistic disorder, and the severity measured by social responsive scale, it was 84, quite significantly high. The typical score is 50 in the typical neurotypical children, and the sex ratio is 5:1, all the things that we know about autism. And the mean IQ was 75, with about 60% have some form of ID, and their adaptive function T-score was 38. Again, the typically developing children was 50, quite low. On the other hand, non-clinical population identified in our study, the majority of them have some type of other ASD, and their SRS, the severity score was lower than the clinical population, still much higher than the typically developing children. The sex ratio was much lower, still male predominance, but it was reduced to 2.5:1. The mean IQ was 98. They are so the average IQ, that's why they were able to in the regular education school. And then the 16% had mild ID or borderline intellectual functioning. And their adaptive function was better than the clinical population, but still much lower than the typically developing children. So now with the DSM of, I'm just trying to check the time. What happened after we published the study that in 2011, that 2015, the DSM-5 was out, and with the changes that I talked about, that it eliminated other subtypes of the PDD of the DSM-4, which is Asperger disease, and the PDD-NOS. And this created a lot of anxiety and confusion for the care providers and also the patients and the families, scared of the losing diagnosis, thus losing the eligibility for the care. So we decided to look at the changes of the prevalence, so who's going to be affected most by this change of the DSM-5. Interestingly, at the same time, we didn't plan together, but the time that it was published in 2014, CDC, the study also did the same thing, and in February, it was published at the same time. So I want to show you a bit of a differences and similarities of the study design. So the CDC study is strictly record review. In Korean study is in-person screening. Screening and then in-person assessment. Study period is similar. The target population for CDC study was 8 years old, whereas our study was 7 to 12 years old. And again, the diagnosis is the clinical record review and the clinician diagnosis, whereas our the diagnosis is clinician's best estimate diagnosis based on the ADAS and the ADI cognitive testing. And despite of these differences and the different population, we were pretty surprised to see that actually the findings were so similar. Both studies reported about 15 to 18% of the decrease of the prevalence by using the DSM-5 instead of DSM-4. And also the impact on these changes were same on both sex, boy and girl. And the most impacted one in CDC study was ASD, IQ greater than 70, which is not probably mostly in the regular education schools or with, like in our study, probably non-clinical population. And us was the PDD-NOS with high IQ, pretty similar. The CDC study, they didn't have any information about the social communications disorder, and we did. So the DSM-5 brought the social communication disorder as a new category, which is pragmatic, the impairment in the pragmatic use of the social communication, but it's pretty similar, but it doesn't have RRB. And what we found is that those people who had PDD diagnosis with DSM-4, but now lose the diagnosis of ASD with DSM-5, mostly these are the PDD-NOS with high IQ, and 77% met the SCD criteria, and remaining 23% met the diagnosis of ADHD and or anxiety disorder. So this means that DSM-5, ASD, and SD prevalence combining together, that was the DSM-4 PDD prevalence. Now, the replication is the most sincere form of flattery in science. And we were pretty gratified after that, that it has been replicated in many countries and many investigators in Japan, in Australia, and even in the recent study that was reported by CDC, MMWR, that 1 out of 36, which is exactly the same number. So now we talked about all this prevalence. What about incidence? Incidence is important because even a small change of incidence can direct us to the mechanism of ASD susceptibility. All of a sudden, there are some group of children begin to have more ASD that might give us some insight. So to do the instance change, that we gotta have the prospective cohort study. So what we decided to do with NIEHS support is that we decided to continue this the total population screening and assessment in the next 10 consecutive birth cohort in the 7-year-old children who is entering to the school system. So until now, we screened about 62,000 7-year-old children, and we completed the 750 screen positive children's comprehensive assessment. And of these children, about 400 children was confirmed to have diagnosis of autism. And we're in the process of simulation and modeling to compute 7-year cumulative instance that we talked about of autism spectrum disorder. And I hope that I will be invited back here to share the ASD cumulative instance with my pediatric colleagues. With that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm open to the questions.
It sounds to me from those last slides that you showed that the prevalence is actually very similar in different countries. And I was wondering if that surprised you and if that is the same as for other diagnoses such like ADHD, other mental health disorders in children.
That's a very good question, because when I presented the data in 2011, everybody goes, oh my goodness, Korean children, something's wrong with them, or what's going on in Korea. And I kept trying to say, no, no, no. If you look at the clinical population, and if I did the same study design like everybody else did, I would have ended up exactly same number. The difference comes from the children that I identified in the community who have never been identified and never been treated. So the more the comprehensive coverage of study population, the more you put effort to screen and identify children, as long as the diagnostic criteria is similar and not changes, the prevalence is going to be similar. And autism is considered as a more of a biological diagnosis rather than a cultural diagnosis. So there's, I think, no reason to believe there is a huge difference in the autism prevalence. Like, schizophrenia prevalence is 1% across the different countries all over the world. And autism is going to be similar. That's what I was thinking. It's not going to go up to like 4%, 5%, 6%, or 10%, unless we change the definition. I'm thinking that it's going to be between 2 to 3%. It's not a rare disease. It's a pretty common condition, and it's going to be saturated somehow. So I wasn't very scared or surprised by the findings of the CDC. Go ahead.
Great talk.
Thank you.
Philosophically, we think that there is a cycle of expanding diagnosis and then splitting that's going on with these kind of syndromes that we see. And I would look, including like ADD and other things that we diagnose in children that affect.
Yes, that's another great question. I think we are seeing that going here to going there and then going here to going there. We're going to see that. So the DSM-5 is another effort. Try to make it less complex. The reason they get rid of Asperger and PDD-NOS is because there is no evidence that actually this group has different natural course or response to the treatment. So they are all same umbrella. And I hope, and then the other thing is that they dropped Rett syndrome or CDD, and as soon as they figure out the reason or the genes they found were responsible for this syndrome, they are taking out. We ended up having some form of syndrome that we don't know the cause. So probably as we approach, we do understand more of the autism, maybe the social communication deficits, and the RRB will be under the name of the autism, but will be quite divided by the cause, this genetics, this circuit, and then with the hope that we can develop some kind of targeted treatment for each group. So there is a whole, based on the research, empirical research, if there is any convergence of their natural course and the outcome, then there'll be some refinement and maybe some inclusion of some other disorders. I hope that's going to be based on the evidence.
I was wondering if I could ask
Okay,
one more.
we gentleman has.
Oh, sorry.
I'll jump in. Sure. Thinking about how both diseases are a culmination of some interaction between genetics and environment, and reflecting on your question or your thought about looking at incidence and thinking of mechanisms. Do you predict, based on the pandemic experiences and shutdowns and isolation, that we may see a change in incidence reflected in the children who were at an at-risk age and maybe on the fringes of autism now?
The quick answer is that I don't expect the instance is going to change, but the way that we're going to identify might change over the course, because sometimes, especially these high functioning or kids with autism with milder symptom and a high IQ, it's not very evident in when they are surrounded by adults and family, because they are adorable. I mean, I can tell you, we have this cuteness scale in our clinic. All the kids who come to our clinic are so cute. We're just in love with everybody. And because they are adorable and cute, and the families scaffold, and then they don't look like they have any problems. I have one patient right now that I cannot find any history of autism because he was not exposed to peer. But when they go to the school and then exposed to peer and social setting, that it becomes more evident. With the COVID and during the COVID, they didn't go to school, and with the Zoom, that it was not really evident, or it was hard even for us to make a diagnosis. With the in school and then going in, and you know, the kids with had a little different experiences with COVID lockdown. We will see how we can identify children with autism, but biologically, I don't think there is any reason, unless the COVID virus or other forms of infection impact on the fetal brain or children's brain to change their biology and then develop autism, which we are doing the study with our perinatal epidemiologists at UCSF, try to see if there's any autism or phenotype in the offspring of the children who were infected COVID during pregnancy. But that's a very important, because my hypothesis is that it ain't gonna change much.
I don't see any questions from the Zoom audience. So with that, I want to thank you for a great talk, and thanks so much for coming for us to.
Thank you for having me. It was just wonderful.